So far in this chapter, we have been looking at the federal, well, that's what the chapter's about. In this chapter, we have been covering the federal budget. We've looked at taxes, and we are currently looking at spending. And we're going to wrap all of that up today by looking at the last couple of major sources of government expenditures. All right, so the first one that we're going to look at in this video, it's actually a double header. All right, we got Medicare and Medicaid. All right, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but all right, once again, these are 2018 numbers. All right, so our 2018 Medicare expenditures were $582 billion. Right, and for Medicaid, those expenditures were $407.6 billion. I will say that this was an estimate at the time that I pulled this data. All right, so these are two very big programs. Medicare, of course, being our kind of health insurance for the elderly, and then Medicaid being health insurance for low-income individuals. All right, really, as far as expenditures, we're just going to kind of state what they are, and we're going to leave it at that. Right, so that's Medicare and Medicaid, kind of a short thing. This video is going to be even shorter than I figured. All right, but those are our big portions of the budget. Again, I think, and again, this is just me, so this is not an economic fact, right? But I would imagine, given changes in demographics, that we are going to see that Medicare budget, right, continue to rise, right, and continue to be take on a larger portion of the federal budget, right, and it would not surprise me if it surpassed even defense spending. Right, if it hasn't already, it may well have. It was going up at a pretty good clip the last time I checked. All right, but let's move on to the next thing, if I've got any markers that still work. All right, so we're just going to call this unemployment and welfare. So this is our unemployment and unemployment insurance and other transfers. Right. These do take 200 to 400 billion dollars per year. Not including Medicaid or unemployment insurance. All right, so these would be our transfers. All right, what we would kind of typically think of as transfers or welfare. All right, so things like TANF, which is temporary assistance for needy families. Right. Again, this is a program. Benefits can be received for 5 years in a lifetime. Right. So they're not unlimited. All right. You've only got 5 years. You can spend those however you wish. All right. Then things like public housing will also be included in here. The Earned Income Tax Credit, or ITC. This is what we were talking about in part of the taxes, right, when we were talking about credits. Right, this is a tax credit designed for low-income individuals, right, that helps incentivizes and helps people who are working, right? So that if you're kind of working, you don't lose a bunch of benefits, right? And so you can encourage people to continue to work with these earned income tax credits, all right? And this takes up about $65 billion federally, all right? And then we have, we'll put that 65 billion. And then on top of that, we do have our unemployment insurance. Let's see, I don't really want to write it underneath that because it's going to look like it falls under there. Well, so unemployment insurance. All right, that was $35 billion in 2016. All right. Well, I haven't said this at all, Darren. I don't necessarily expect you guys to know these numbers, right? It's more just about getting the general understanding of how all of this stuff works. All right, but that is our unemployment and welfare, or our unemployment insurance and transfers. All right, so about 200 to 400 billion per year. All right, it's a pretty nebulous number, but there's a lot going into that. All right, and that is it for those major sources. And then, of course, we had one that we didn't actually talk about, which was the net insurance on debt. All right, that's just, or not net insurance, net interest on debt, right? But that's just the interest being paid on national debt, right? Not a whole lot to talk about there. All right, there is one last thing that I do want us to talk about. All right, and that is everything else. All right, if we look at, which I should have done earlier, I thought I had it written down, but I don't. All right, unless I did my math wrong, which is possible because I did it quite quickly. All right, if we add up the percentages on that for those major sources of government expenditures, right, it adds up to 75%, or at least that's what I got when I did it in my head real quick. Right, that leaves 25% of the federal budget for, that can't be right. Last time it seemed like it was like 9%. Regardless, well, regardless, right? Those were just 5 things, right? Those were 5 categories that took up nearly 75% of the federal budget, right? But there's a lot of other stuff that the federal government does, right? So things like farm subsidies, all right, paying for infrastructure, right? Our federal courts, federal prisons, the FDA, the FBI, NASA, the wages of federal employees, national parks, right? All of those things and more, right, come out of what's left after those major sources of government expenditures. All right. So why am I bringing this up? All right. The reason is because in the next chapter, right, when we start looking at fiscal policy, all right, so this is the policy about taxation and spending, right, that's used to try to manipulate aggregate demand and therefore the macroeconomy as a whole, right? When we get to that point and we say, well, the government should start spending more, right? There's not a whole lot of room left, right? All of these things, right, are covered by the federal government, and also almost all of it's earmarked already, right? So that remaining money has already been set aside for funding NASA or the FBI or the FDA, or taking care of the federal courts and the federal prison systems, right? So there's a lot of money, right? A lot of money in this everything else category that is already kind of spoken for, that's what I was looking for. All right, that's already spoken for. So when we get into the fiscal policy chapter, right, and we're looking at how the government could, deal with a negative shock to aggregate demand or a negative real shock, then we might say, well, let's just increase or decrease government spending, right? But we do need to remember that it's not as straightforward as that, right? Because again, there's not a whole lot left at the end. All right, but that's for the next chapter. All right, I'll rehash all of that then as well. All right, but we'll go ahead and call it. Well, we're not going to go ahead. That sounds like we're not done, and we're just calling it. We are done. All right, that's it for this video. All right, that's it for this chapter. I will see you guys in the next chapter where we are talking about fiscal policy. All right, I will see you then.